A force of nature, a free spirit, and a fearless artist, Colette was a best-selling author, a music hall star, a mime artist, and an elder stateswoman of French literature. And 150 years after she was born, she remains an icon. As the novelist John Updike said, in the prize ring of life, few of us would have lasted 10 rounds with Colette. Well, to discuss her life and work, I'm joined by author Emmanuelle Lambert, whose book Sidonie Gabrielle Colette takes us through her many faces. Hello, Emmanuelle.
Hi.
Now, I wanted to talk about this portrait that you paint of a woman who was a real trailblazer, a liberated woman. It wasn't only her art, it was also her personal life, her very daring relationships that contribute to that legend.
Yeah, Colette was a great writer that we know. But she was so fearless. She was a fearless person, and her career began when she was very young, when she was 20 years old, and she met her first husband, and she was writing books, but he was signing the books. And her whole career can be read as conquests for self-emancipation, for independence, for freedom to write, freedom to love, and freedom to be whoever she wants to be.
Indeed, some of her lovers were quite high-profile people in society at the time.
Yeah, of course. She began with this man named Willy, in good French, who was Henri Gauthier-Villars, came from good family, was very well-known critic. And then she married the Baron de Jouvenel. But in between, she had a very important love affair with a woman called Missy, who defined herself as a man. And she lived dressed as a man, and it was a very huge scandal at those times. And Colette lived this story in the open. She did not hide herself. And later, once she has divorced her second husband, the Baron de Jouvenel, she married a man who was 16 years younger than her.
Now, indeed, much of that magnetic personality was formed when Colette was still a young girl, growing up in the Burgundy countryside. We took a trip to her family home in Saint-Sauveur-en-Puisée to learn more about her rural roots with Jérôme Vasilakos and Jennifer Ben-Brahim behind the camera. The house was large, topped by a lofty garret, a typical burgher's house in an old village. That's how author Colette describes her family home. But this building, its garden and surroundings were much more than just a pleasant place to grow up. They were also the inspiration for the landscapes, the sensations and the stories at the centre of her famous novels, and we're off to find out more. Colette was born in this house in January 1873. The youngest child of Sidonie and Captain Colette. Hers was a bucolic childhood here in the Burgundy countryside. Frédéric Maget is the director of the Maison de Colette. He shows us to the bedroom of the little girl who would eventually become a literary sensation. We're in her childhood bedroom. What was the young Colette like in terms of personality?
First of all, she was a very happy little girl, raised by parents who weren't really like the other parents of the time. They were different in terms of their ideas, their temperament, and the very liberal education they would give their children.
We already know this house thanks to accounts in Colette's books like My Mother's House and Sido, which is about her mother, Sidonie. She played a very important role in Colette's childhood, is that right?
Sido and her daughter, who she called Gabrielle, my sweet darling, my golden treasure, masterpiece, wonder. Well, they had a very extremely close relationship. It was a fusional bond. You are me, she would say to her daughter. And Sido raised her children to believe that they were different and that being different was a very valuable thing.
Colette was a great fan of nature. Where do we see that love for the land, plants, animals in her artistic output?
You'll find those references to the natural world in her very first novel, Claudine à l'école, in 1900, where there are wonderful descriptions of the woods here in Puisaye. And in her later works, the Fanal Bleu, the Étoile Vespère, Pour un herbier, these are much more mature texts. In Colette's eyes, there's no difference between animals, plants, and humans.
Colette left this house at 18 years old, but she returned to it both physically and sentimentally for the writing of her first novel, Claudine at School. Its literary and commercial success was the talk of the town in Paris and prompted a theatre production and various adaptations for film and television.
Comment vous appelez-vous? Claudine. J'ai beaucoup entendu parler de vous.
Samia Borgi oversees research at the Colette Study Centre. She tells us more about the writer's literary debuts. If Claudine at School takes inspiration from Colette's own adolescence here in the village, can we say the main character is a portrait of Colette herself?
I don't think we can go as far as to say that, because Colette herself said that Claudine is me and she's not me. Maybe she was a younger me from another time.
The book was written by Colette when she was still very young, but it was originally published under the name of her husband, Willy, who took credit for it. How did that happen?
Willy took sole authorship of Claudine à l'école for reasons that they agreed upon together. First of all, she didn't want to write, to be published. She didn't want to put her name to these books. So this was a convenient solution for her at the time, in any case.
Claudine at School did prompt some surprise, even shock when it first came out. Tell us what was so controversial about this book.
Well, when it was first published, this book went unnoticed. In March 1900, no one was talking about it. No one took any notice. Then, thanks to two articles, one by Rachilde and the other by Charles Maurras, people started paying attention to the novel. And from that moment on, everyone was trying to get their hands on it, because in it, Claudine and Willy invent this character of a modern teenager who, up until then, didn't really have a voice or a literary existence. And at just 15 years old, there's this young woman who asserts herself, her freedom, her independence. She speaks to men as her equal. She even teases them. This sort of character has never been seen before, and she arrives like a thunderclap in early 20th century literature.
Dans la littérature du début du XXe siècle.
Now, we know that fate would soon lead the young Colette to a very different milieu. She was in Paris, which was the centre of the world at the turn of the 20th century, hanging around with people like Proust, Ravel, Debussy, poets, artists. And then from 1906, she took to the stage herself, embracing music hall. Emmanuelle, tell us a bit more about the shows that she was staging at the time.
At that time, she was a mime. She had began to produce herself in what we called les salons, and particularly a lesbian salon with her friends, her female friends. And she got really professional in that art. She took lessons, and so she began like that. And then she became an actress, but she had this strong accent from Burgundy. It was some of a peculiar way to go on stage. And the mime was very interesting because Colette is a writer of the body. Everything goes through the sensation, the look, the touch. And in a way, she had the experience of living it on a different art from literature. And I suppose, I'm sure, this stage experience nourished her literature because of a way of controlling her body.
Controlling her body, but also controlling her image, because your book features some wonderful photographs, portraits that Colette made throughout her career. How aware was she of her image? How did she control it?
I suppose she was very aware of it. Because, as I said, she was a professional, so she had learned how to make up, how to dress, how to pose, which profile to choose. So she was a professional. But what strikes me is that she began really young. She was 20 years old. And the ultimate photographs in my book, she's 80 years old. And she's still, how can I put it? She has still a lot of seductive way to pose. She's looking really right into the face of the photographer. And even when she's very old and she's crippled, she has a bad health, she's still a woman with desire. And you can see this through all the photographs that are in the book. And I think that's a kind of a lesson.
Now, we know that at the end of her life, she was the first woman here in France to receive a state funeral, a great honour. She was also the first woman to sit as president of the very respected Goncourt Academy, which gives out the literary prize. How did she go from being this bohemian figure to being an elder stateswoman of the arts?
Well, I suppose that's because she won. She won because she won the right to put her name on her books. She wrote books which were bestsellers, and in a way she entered the canon. So she came from a kind of peculiar way of living with this man, older, the women, the stage, and etc. And at the end of her life, she's a well-known star of French literature. And in a way, I suppose she knew that there was some kind of misunderstanding. Jean Cocteau, who was a friend and a neighbor, wrote it in his journal. He said, well, okay, I prefer the dancer.
Okay, well, the talent prevailed in the end. Emmanuelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll wrap up the show with another perspective on Colette, this one courtesy of the Jan Michalowski Literature Foundation in Switzerland. They're staging an exhibition of letters, manuscripts, first editions and photos, including some never-before-seen documents, which give us an insight into this woman of letters and of great passions. We'll leave you with a glimpse of that show. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you here next time on France 24.
Versailles, Mont-Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbors many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs, meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.